Welcome. In this lesson, I wanted to provide a quick update to this course regarding the default branch for Git and GitHub. The reason for this change is very political, and I'm not going to dive into that. I just want to help address the issue which is causing some errors in some lessons in this course, as well as some confusion. A while back, the Git community decided to migrate away from the term master as the default branch name. The main Git project has been taking a gradual approach by adding support for setting a default branch name, giving instructions on how to change a default branch in existing repos, and warning users of possible change in the future. This all started in Git version 2.28 and later. As of the production of this video, the default is still master, but the Git project is actively encouraging the use of other names as the default. This could change in an upcoming update. However, GitHub, the most common Git repository hosting provider, decided to make the change more suddenly. While GitHub has not changed the default branch on existing repositories, although it certainly could do that, they did set the default branch name to main for all new repositories. So, if you create a repository locally with the default branch name of master, and then attempt to push that to GitHub, you might encounter an error, especially if you continue to explicitly reference master as the target branch name. However, this default can be reverted back to master, which might be preferred in some cases. Okay, there are two approaches we can take. As just mentioned, we can simply reset GitHub's default branch name to master, at least until the end of this course. This approach will have the least impact on the rest of the course. Let's try that out. I'm going to head over to my computer, open my web browser, navigate to GitHub, and then log in. Once logged in, expand the options under your profile and choose Settings. Once on the Settings page, go to Repositories. Once there, for Repository Default Branch, replace main with master, and then click Update to save the change. Now, let's test this out. Return to the main page on GitHub, create a new repository, give your repository a unique name, an optional description, and add a README to it. Once we do that, GitHub should tell us the default branch name, which should be master for the repository. Click Create Repository to continue. GitHub will create the new repository with the default branch name as master, as we configured within settings. Now, the rest of the course should work without any changes. Once you're done with the course, you can optionally return to your settings page and reset the default repository branch name to main, or whatever your company's corporate standards are. The second approach would be to just embrace the change. In this case, you would simply leave the new default as main, and make the adjustments on your local side accordingly. First, we need to start off making sure our version of Git is at least 2.28 or later. If not, we need to update it before proceeding. In my case, my version of Git is out of date. Let me hop over to the official Git website and download the latest version. This is for Windows. On Mac, if using Apple Git, make sure you have the latest OS and related software updates installed. If running on Linux, use your system's package manager to update. Alright, although I can specify the default branch during the setup wizard, I prefer to show the current default behavior before making any changes. Okay, now that I have reinstalled Git for Windows, let's try that again. Great, it looks like I have a new enough version of Git. Let's start by creating a new repo, just specifying the repo name. This will use the current default branch name. Once the repo has been created, let's go into that directory. Our prompt shows that we are on the master branch, which is the current default. We need to add at least one commit before we can change the branch name. So let's do that right quick. Okay, great. We have our first commit on this repo. So now we can change the default branch name with the following command: git space branch space -m space and then the name of the branch, main. The -m option tells Git to move or rename the current branch to the name we just specified, which is main. Okay, now that we have our local repository set up, and with the default branch changed to main, we can proceed to creating the repository on GitHub. I'm going to give it the same name, just to keep things easy. Provide an optional description, and I will make sure not to add any extra files during the creation process. If you did things correctly, you should end up on a page like this. Now, I'm just going to follow the instructions to add the remote reference to my local repository, copying and pasting the first command like so. Since we have already renamed our local default repository, there's no need to do the next line. That just leaves pushing the local repository to GitHub. Git push origin main. Instead of specifying master, I specify main instead. You'll need to make the same adjustments throughout the rest of the course if you go this route. Okay, it is actually possible to specify the default branch to start a repo on the local side. So let's do that too. Back in my projects folder, I will create a new Git repository, but this time I'll pass in the newly added -b flag to allow me to specify main as my default branch for this repository. Once done, I'll go into the repo, and we can see my prompt reflects main as the default branch. As part of the recent updates, Git added the ability to configure the default branch. Use this command: git config --global init.default branch with a capital B, space, and then the name of the branch you want to use. In my case, main. This will update our settings to use main as our default branch unless we specify something else explicitly. Let's double check to make sure the setting is configured. Git config --global --list. Now, let's try it out. Again, back in the projects folder, I'm going to create a new repository using the same init command as before, only specifying the repo name. Now, if we go into our newly created repo, we should see our prompt is using main as the default branch for the repo. Okay, one last example. This should be pretty straightforward, but I want to cover it just the same. Go back to your web browser, create a new repository on GitHub. We're going to assume we're going to use the new default on GitHub. That is main. If you need to reset the default branch name back in settings, go ahead and do that first. This time, I will add the README file to the repo as I create it. Great. Now with the new repo created with our README file, let's clone the repo to our local system. All right, back in the terminal and projects folder, git clone, and then paste in the git clone URL. Now, here we can go into the repo and see that it has the main branch. Let's edit the README file. Commit those changes, and then push those changes back to GitHub. The first time, I'll use the full command, specifying the remote name and the branch name. Git push origin main. Back in the browser, refresh the page to see our changes. Let's do that sequence once more. Edit the README file. Commit the changes, and now I'm going to push the changes using a shorter version of the push command, git push. I'll let Git assume the remote and branch name. I just wanted to make sure this still works as it should. Brilliant. Again, refresh the web page to see the changes. As course impacts go, the first option offers the least impact overall, once you change the default branch name in GitHub. However, the entire community is trying to move away from master as the default branch, so perhaps the second option is more forward-leaning. You'll just have to remember, whenever I say master, referring to the default branch, to replace that with main instead. Overall, I don't think this is a huge change, but it can be confusing if you follow every command exactly. I hope this video will clarify things until I have time to completely revise the entire course.